the wind sighs across the metal plains of Colony 7. It carries no names, no voices, only the low hum of the geothermal vents below. Outside the thick glass, the sky is a vast, quiet blue. No satellites streak across it. No distant ships cut the horizon. Just the slow turn of the planet and the deep silence of being the last. This is where humanity ended, or perhaps where it began again. A single colony on a single planet, orbiting a single star, holding the quiet weight of everything that came before. What does it mean to be the last? To stand where no one else stands, and know that no one will ever stand there again. The wind sighs. The vents hum. The silence is not empty. It is full of everything that was, and everything that will never be. Listen now. Listen to the quiet. Imagine a place where the air tastes of stillness. Imagine a planet that has not known human footsteps for generations. Yet here, one small cluster of buildings clings to the edge of a great desert. The structures are low, made of dark stone and smooth, cool metal, blending into the landscape like a slow breath. There are no towering spires, no flashing lights, no constant buzz of connection, just the gentle pulse of life support systems, the soft glow of bioluminescent plants in the central atrium, the quiet drip of water in the recycled systems. Outside, the desert stretches endlessly, painted in shades of ochre and dust. The sun is a steady, warm presence, not the frantic, changing light of Earth. The sky is clear, showing the faint, ancient constellations that no longer hold meaning for anyone. You can hear the wind, but you cannot hear the echo of a crowd. You can see the stars, but you cannot see the reflection of a million city lights. This is not a place of loss. Not exactly. It is a place of quiet, of space, of time measured in slow breaths, not in frantic seconds. The colony is small, barely 100 people. They move with a calm that comes from knowing there is no one else to rush for, no one else to please. They tend the gardens where food grows under soft lights. They read the old books that hold stories from a world that no longer exists. They sit by the great windows and watch the desert, not in boredom, but in a deep, patient understanding. The silence is not a void. It is a presence. It is the sound of the planet breathing. It is the sound of history settling. It is the sound of being utterly alone, and yet perfectly, quietly at home. Arden walked the perimeter path at dawn. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of damp stone and the dry, clean smell of the desert wind. The path was worn smooth by countless footsteps over the years. A simple line of compacted earth leading around the central dome. Arden was the keeper of the archives, the quiet guardian of the colony's memory. She carried a small, worn data tablet, its screen glowing softly with the names of the dead, the dates of the last transmissions from Earth, the records of the long journey here. She did not read the tablet as she walked. She remembered the names. She remembered the faces. The colony was built on the ruins of a different hope. It was not the first, not the second. It was the seventh. The others had failed. They had been too small, too far, too hungry for the silence. They had crumbled under the weight of being the last. But this colony, this one, had learned to live with the quiet. It had learned that silence was not the absence of sound, but the presence of everything else. Arden stopped at the edge of the desert, where the path met the endless sand. She looked out at the empty horizon. She thought of the great cities that had once been, the noise of millions of lives lived in close quarters, the constant hum of connection. She thought of the way people had rushed to be seen, to be heard, to be part of something larger than themselves. And now, here, there was only the sound of the wind, the sound of the vents, the sound of her own breathing. She thought of the first settlers, the ones who had come here with the hope of building something new, something better, something that would not repeat the mistakes of Earth. They had come with their children, their books, their music. They had come with the weight of knowing they were the last. They had not known how to carry that weight. They had not known how to live with it. They had tried to fill the silence with noise, with too much activity, with too many words. And it had not worked. The colony had nearly died. Then, slowly, they had learned. They had learned to sit with the silence. They had learned to find the meaning in the quiet moments. They had learned that being the last did not mean being alone. It meant being the only ones to remember. It meant being the only ones to care. Arden turned back towards the dome. The first light of the sun was touching the highest point of the central atrium. She could see the faint outline of the gardens through the glass. She could hear the soft sound of water falling into the collection tank. She felt the weight of the memory, but it was not a burden. It was a gift. It was the weight of being human, of knowing what it was to be part of something larger, even when that something larger was gone. She walked slowly, her footsteps soft on the path. She thought of the children who had been born here, who had never known the noise of a city, who had never known the rush of a crowd. They had grown up with the quiet. They had grown up with the slow turn of the planet. They had grown up knowing that they were the only ones, and they had learned to love the quiet. They had learned to find the music in the silence. Arden reached the dome. The door slid open with a soft hiss. She stepped inside, the cool air of the colony greeting her. The silence was still there, but it was different now. It was the silence of home. It was the silence of belonging. She carried the weight of the past, but she carried it with a quiet strength. She was the keeper of the memory, but she was also the keeper of the hope. The hope that being the last did not mean being forgotten. The hope that being the last meant being the only ones who could remember and who could care. The colony was not built on a new world. It was built on the old world. The world that Earth had become, the world that had been abandoned, the world that had been left behind. It was a world that had forgotten how to be quiet. It had forgotten how to be still. It had forgotten how to be alone. The settlers had come here seeking a new beginning, but they had brought the old world with them. They had brought its noise, its rush, its constant need to be connected. They had tried to build a city here, a place of light and sound and activity. But the silence had been too loud. The quiet had been too deep. The vast emptiness of the desert had been too much. The colony had nearly died. It had been a slow death, not of violence, but of meaning. The settlers had lost the reason for being. They had forgotten why they had come. They had forgotten that the silence was not empty. It was full of everything that had been. They had forgotten that the quiet was not a void. It was a presence. They had forgotten that being the last did not mean being the only one. It meant being the only ones who could remember. It meant being the only ones who could care. Then, slowly, the colony began to change. It began to understand. It began to learn. The first change was small. It was the decision to stop trying to fill the silence. To stop trying to be loud. To stop trying to be seen. They began to sit. They began to listen. They began to watch the desert. They began to feel the weight of the silence, and to find that weight was not a burden, but a gift. They began to read the old books again, not to escape the silence, but to find the meaning in it. They began to tend the gardens, not to fill the time, but to find the rhythm of life in the quiet. They began to talk, not to fill the silence, but to share the weight of the memory. They began to learn that the silence was not empty. It was full of the stories of the past, the hopes of the future, the quiet strength of being human. They began to understand that being the last did not mean being alone. It meant being the only ones to hold the memory. It meant being the only ones to care for the stories. It meant being the only ones to remember what it was to be human. The colony became a place of quiet purpose. It became a place of slow, deep thought. It became a place where the weight of the past was not a burden, but a guide. The settlers learned that the silence was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of everything else. It was the sound of the planet breathing. It was the sound of history settling. It was the sound of being utterly alone, and yet perfectly, quietly, at home. They learned that being the last did not mean being forgotten. It meant being the only ones who could remember. It meant being the only ones who could care. They learned that the quiet was not a void. It was a fullness. It was the fullness of being human. They learned that the silence was not empty. It was full of the stories of the past, the hopes of the future, the quiet strength of being human. They learned that the weight of being the last was not a burden. It was a gift. It was the gift of being the only ones to remember. It was the gift of being the only ones to care. The colony became a place of quiet strength. It became a place of deep, slow thought. It became a place where the silence was not empty, but full. It became a place where being the last was not a tragedy, but a quiet, profound truth. They learned that the vast emptiness of the desert was not a sign of nothingness. It was a sign of everything that had been. It was a sign of the world that had been left behind. It was a sign of the world that had been forgotten. They learned that the silence was not a lack of sound. It was a presence of meaning. They learned that the quiet was not a lack of life. It was a presence of life, slow and deep and full. They learned that being the last did not mean being alone. It meant being the only ones to hold the memory. It meant being the only ones to care for the stories. It meant being the only ones to remember what it was to be human. The colony became a place of quiet purpose. It became a place of slow, deep understanding. It became a place where the silence was not empty, but full. It became a place where being the last was not a tragedy, but a quiet, profound truth. What does it mean to be the last? It is not a question of numbers. It is a question of meaning. It is a question of what it means to be human when there is no one else to see you, to hear you, to care. It is a question of what it means to carry the weight of everything that was, and to know that no one else will ever carry it. It is a question of what it means to be alone, and yet not alone, because the silence holds everything that was. The silence is not empty. It is full of the stories of the past. It is full of the hopes of the future. It is full of the quiet strength of being human. Being the last does not mean being forgotten. It means being the only ones who remember. It means being the only ones who care. It means being the only ones who hold the memory of what it was to be human. This is a quiet truth. It is a truth that is not loud. It is a truth that is not seen. It is a truth that is felt. It is a truth that is carried in the silence. The colony learned that the silence was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of everything else. It was the sound of the planet breathing. It was the sound of history settling. It was the sound of being utterly alone, and yet perfectly, quietly at home. The silence is not a void. It is a fullness. It is the fullness of being human. It is the fullness of memory. It is the fullness of hope. It is the fullness of care. Being the last does not mean being the only one. It means being the only ones who can remember. It means being the only ones who can care. It means being the only ones who can hold the weight of what it was to be human. This is not a burden. It is a gift. It is the gift of being the only ones to remember. It is the gift of being the only ones to care. It is the gift of being the only ones to hold the memory. The colony learned that the quiet was not a lack of life. It was a presence of life, slow and deep and full. It was the life of the desert. It was the life of the gardens. It was the life of the people. It was the life of the memory. The quiet was not empty. It was full of the stories of the past. It was full of the hopes of the future. It was full of the quiet strength of being human. Being the last does not mean being alone. It means being the only ones who can remember. It means being the only ones who can care. It means being the only ones who can hold the memory. This is the quiet truth. It is not a loud truth. It is not a seen truth. It is a felt truth. It is a carried truth. It is the truth that the colony carried in its quiet heart. It is the truth that the silence held. It is the truth that being the last was not a tragedy, but a quiet, profound gift. The colony learned that the silence was not empty. It was full of everything that was and everything that would be. It was full of the memory of what it was to be human. It was full of the hope of what it could be. It was full of the quiet strength of being human. This is the philosophy of the last colony. It is not a philosophy of loss. It is a philosophy of presence. It is not a philosophy of absence. It is a philosophy of fullness. It is a philosophy of being the last, and knowing that being the last means being the only ones who can remember, and who can care, and who can hold the memory of what it was to be human. This is not a sad truth. It is a quiet, profound truth. It is a truth that is carried in the silence. It is a truth that is felt in the quiet. It is a truth that is lived in the slow turn of the planet. The colony was never the last. It was the only. There was no one else. But there was no one else who needed to be. The silence was not empty. It was full of the presence of what was. The quiet was not a void. It was a presence of what could be. The colony was not the last human colony. It was the only human colony. And in being the only, it was not alone. It was the only one to remember, and the only one to care. The silence was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of everything that was. The quiet was not the absence of life. It was the presence of life, slow and deep and full. The colony was not the last. It was the only. And in being the only, it was the most human. It was the most present. It was the most full. The weight of being the only was not a burden. It was a gift. It was the gift of being the only ones to remember. It was the gift of being the only ones to care. It was the gift of being the only ones to hold the memory. The colony was not the last. It was the only, and in being the only, it was the most. The silence held everything. The quiet was full. The colony breathed, and the stars watched on. The wind sighs across the metal plains. The geothermal vents hum softly below. The colony breathes. The silence is full. The quiet is full. The memory is full. The hope is full. The colony is not the last. It is the only, and in being the only, it is the most. The stars watch. The desert stretches. The silence holds, and the quiet is full.